Hi, everybody. It's Mark Viale from Lab 415, and welcome to Lab 415 Spotlight on Brand Marketing in the Modern Age. We use these spotlights to bring clarity to hot topics by inviting industry experts, startup founders, and marketing leaders to share their journey, but also all things growth. And today's conversation is no stranger to growth, as we're really talking about brand loyalty and the ability for companies to be able to differentiate their company from the competition. And I would say there's a big issue out there. There's what I call the Beijing of brands. Everybody feels the same. I don't really feel any differentiation. Now, of course, there's always exceptions, and I'm not the only one that believes this. I mean, there was actually a recent survey but conducted by Havas Research with over 395,000 consumers responding. And they called it a deepening cynicism regarding brands. Here's some stats. 71% have little faith that brands will deliver on their promises. 73% saying brands must act now for the good of society and the planet, meaning they have to stand for more than the transaction. 75% of brands could disappear overnight, and most people wouldn't care. 75% felt that they wouldn't care if that brand disappeared overnight and would easily find a replacement. Now, I think there's many reasons for this, but I would say it's threefold. And the primary reason being we used to have, the three to four networks, the huge broadcast networks that you could put your brand out there in a nice spot and you could get it wrong and you still get it right because you just had such huge reach. And then there was the deconsolidation of media. And that brings us to the second reason, and that would be the digital media. And so digital media came on strong early 2000s, and then primarily Google, and that was all about the transaction. And so marketers got a little lazy. They got trained to just ask for the transaction. It was all about price. It was all about the offer. And then I would say there was a little bit of a fast money component where the CFO is like, you got to hit plan. You got to hit plan, and you need a low cost of acquisition. And that sort of ran contrary to the brand marketing exercise. And everybody's like, we can hit our numbers with Google and Facebook, we'll be good. But I think what's happened is it's become more of this Beijing as that's happening because you can't tell your story in that bottom of funnel Google transactional promotion. Then I would say the third reason is a massive infusion of capital from venture capitalists that have funded very similar companies. There's sort of a FOMO effect. They're like, I don't want to miss out on that big thing, so I'll fund my own, right? And you see it with AI today and that kind of thing. But so you have similar products out there, and it's like the Grubhub, DoorDash effect. You have the Uber, Lyft. And I would say even when I was working at the Real, we were seeing so many competitors getting funded at the same time. And I thought we did a pretty good job actually using TV to differentiate us with our main value propositions. And I think there's some other companies doing a good job. I think Airbnb, they did a lot of direct response in the beginning. Now they're doing more branding. And then I think Farmer's Dog actually has done a good job of leaping past the pack of all these like trendy, expensive dog food options. They all use TV and remind so what we're talking about is more of a top of funnel, a full funnel approach. And so it's not just your bottom of funnel Google efforts, your middle funnel paid social. You have to bring in that storytelling with the top of funnel, radio, TV, even PR. So really, it's moderation. You're not going to go all branding. You're not going to go all direct response. But I think we're a little bit indexed too high on the direct response side. We have an amazing panel today to talk about how we can get away from this transactional focus and more to tell a story, more to differentiate you. And we have two brand experts, one from the agency side, one from the client side. And then we also brought in a performance marketer who will keep them honest, because it can't be all branding. You have to hit those plan goals with performance. So we're going to bring our panel up to the stage. There they are. Marissa's coming. She's in Miami.
Takes longer to arrive from Miami.
It takes longer from. All right, so I think Marissa's on mute, but that's okay. We're going to do quick intros here. We have Aaron Keller, who we're going to start with. Aaron is a columnist. He's also an author. He wrote The Physics of Brand. He's also the co-founder at Capsule Design from the land of 10,000 lakes and out in Minnesota. And he's going to be really bringing the brand agency sort of voice to this conversation. And then we have John Slater, who I've known for quite a while, long time ago. Speaking of great brands, Kodak. We worked together at ophoto.com that Kodak acquired us way back when. And John has been on the client side, most recently Meta, Twitter, Firefox. And then John's coming from us from Oakland. And then we have Marissa, who usually comes from sunny Oakland, but she is in Miami today for Art Basel. She is the head of CRM and loyalty for E&J Gallo. So really good panel. Everybody say hi.
Hello.
Hello.
All right. And we're going to start off with Aaron. And Aaron, tell us a little bit about your journey, how you got here, how you became the founder over at Capsule.
My entire journey. Well,
and more importantly, what was the white space opportunity that you saw in brand for starting Capsule?
Yes. Yeah. So we started this the year Prince made famous, 1999. So we've been doing this for 24 years, and in getting to this spot, we actually now refer to ourselves as a special projects agency, and that was actually influenced by someone at Meta. I had a conversation with a gentleman who was head of design at Meta at one point in time, as well as many others. But originally, it started with a conversation with our client Patagonia, and literally we've come to this conclusion in the past 2 years that this is who we are. So it's been a journey for us. We started off as brand and design, wrote a number of books, and had some really wonderful clients and great stories as our projects for them have been very successful, including Patagonia, Arc'teryx, and a variety of others. And so arriving at this special projects agency role and responsibility, and we are a partner to our clients as it relates to brand and how to bring their brands to life and be more human, which is part of what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, so Capsule actually, as Aaron just mentioned, works with some great brands, Patagonia, Hydro Flask, Jack Daniels, to name a few. And tell me, because I see this, I've been doing, I've been on the client side for over 30 years, and last year I've been dealing with a lot of clients, consulting them. And the vision thing seems a little hard, pulling that out. I mean, they of course know a vision that they put together in their pitch deck for investors, but how they message their value proposition, their differentiation, it's sort of it's not clear. And like, how do you get to that point? And like, how do you, because a lot of these, as I was talking about the Beijing of brands, how do you make them unique and really bring out their key value propositions?
Well, brands are an extension of us as human beings, right? We've created these things way back when to identify things that we were selling, things that we're putting out there in the marketplace. And what they've lost, and more accelerated loss during this age of digital, is that they are extensions of us. They're the better version of us as human beings. And so they lost pieces of that humanity, essentially, by becoming more digital, more transactional, less human. And they also, and I don't know if I'd blame this collectively on all the lawyers in the world, as we seem to have more of them in the United States than everybody else, they are risk averse, right? They like to take the risk out of organizations. They're often referred to as anti-marketing department, because they don't want to take on the risk of having a personality, because having a personality and a vision can be risky, right? It's putting yourself out there to say that, no, we're going to do something grand. And you note the great ones when you see them and they put out these massive visions. You're like, you are crazy thinking you're going to get there. But somebody has to do it. And those are often the brands that people fall in love with and are connected to, right? Because they feel more human.
Yeah. And does it help when the 'cause I imagine you talk to a lot of CEOs of the smaller companies, and when they need to figure out the brand piece. Do you find it sort of helps when that CEO has like a marketing background?
It can. It depends on the marketing background. I actually have had more affection for engineers,
Okay.
as CEOs. I've seen more of that. That's been more respectful of marketing, because marketing can almost be disrespectful of itself, and skeptical of everything. Right? It's
Yeah.
just naturally if you grew up in the age of advertising, you grew up in a world of, like, you're skeptical of everybody's promise. They are the most skeptical marketers. So that can be dangerous in some ways, versus an engineer can be more open to, can get the arguments, understand the concepts. So I've seen those as probably the best CEOs in my point of view on that.
Yeah.
And then second to that, maybe marketing, maybe more operations, honestly, because they get what's important as the core of the business. What makes the blood pulse in the organization, and they're
Yeah. I
more.
think it depends on the individual, I guess, because I can see how a marketer could be painful because they're like, I'm smarter than you, and like I just need you to execute my vision.
Yeah, right, right.
And so,
Yeah,
I can see how I've seen that happen. And it's funny. Well, it's not funny, but stats I mentioned before, it rings a bell. And we did a Gen Z uh, live event a couple months ago, and we pulled some stats from some research that a Gen Z brand um, had been working on, and we found that they also wanted to only shop from companies that were like thinking bigger, like the Patagonia things. Like I love how Patagonia got out of Black Friday and they used their ad budget to do a full page ad in the New York Times about um, saving the Alaska wilderness. Like I think that really matters to the youth. But we're seeing, this survey that came from a broad range of people from Havas. They're also saying 73% saying brands must act now for the good of society and the planet. Um, do you ever get? I mean, you're on the agency side, so it may be hard for you to sort of push that. But do you get involved with trying to say, hey, this might make you stand apart from the competition, that you're
yeah,
on a higher level than just the transaction?
yeah. No, it is part of when we do, and part of the process is we educate people on what makes for strong brands. And core to that, we talk about your relationship with your community, with the planet, and having something. Now, at a base level, you're employing people. You are, an organization that gives people purpose and meaning in their lives, in the work they do. But you can go beyond that. And you can do a lot more. And Patagonia, as a client, has been an exceptional example of that, for sure. And my favorite quote that came out of some of the Patagonia work was this idea that Patagonia, the company, and Patagonia, the brand, are the same thing. The fact that they can say that, the fact that if they say that, everyone else goes, is that the case for everybody? And I would bet you there's a large percentage are not the case, right? And it's the corporate veil, right? We hide behind this thing that creates protection against all the employees, but yet, and then the quarterly system as well builds on that. And I don't think necessarily the VC world is any healthier in that it just puts the timeline at 5 years, and it's hard to develop a really good personality and brand in only 5 years. You really needs to take time. So this idea that the corporation and the brand are the same thing, that it's true to who they are, and you go to their campus and it feels as
Right.
you would hope it would feel, right? And I've been to many corporate campuses, and I've worked with a lot of brands, and it's a pretty rare thing where you can see that.
Yeah.
And so that it's part of that education. Like you can do this. It does not take any more energy. It just takes intellectual capacity, right? And sitting down and taking the time to think it through, that you can get there, right? It doesn't cost more to have a soul, right?
Yeah.
It just doesn't. It's just a matter of whether you want to have that. And you know, people see that. I mean, we're human beings. We pick up on behaviors. We see that from in the brands in our lives. We go, oh, that's kind of
Right.
gross. And it may not be all of it the truth that you see that's coming through because the media can skew things. But there's a kernel in there somewhere. We know in the cases where things have gone bad for brands. So
Yeah. And, I just heard the other day that the word of the year is authenticity, right? And I think a lot, and, going to the survey about cynicism towards brands, you know, I think that a lot of brands will lead with this. I think Patagonia is true to this. I think that's really that brand of doing good, and that kind of, the wilderness and environment is really ingrained in their brand persona, right? But I think a lot of brands just like, will throw that out there, and it's just like, I think a lot of people are like, I don't really believe it. Like it's just like them saying they're into sustainability, but really, you're all you do is produce denim. How can you be in sustainability? So um, I think that's a really hard thing for brands, and I think you're right. It has to cut through all the way to the employee, to the mission of the company with the employees and how they recruit people, and
yeah,
making sure you get the people the same mindset.
yeah,
I think
and it's
that's
okay. Yeah, I use I've Marvin Windows, which is a window manufacturer here in Minnesota. They've never been a client, but they've been on a series that we have, and I absolutely admire. They finally got to what they do for people, what they do for humanity. They bring light into our lives. They're a window company. They bring
yeah,
light into our homes and into our lives, and light, generates energy. Light brings joy and happiness, and it's like, well, of course you do. How come you can't see that? But
right,
right, but it's you need sometimes outside perspective to help see that because it's hard to
for
see that
sure.
yourself, which is
Sure.
why you always need somebody on the outside, holding up the mirror to you to help you see these things.
Oh, I know,
But
and
also,
that's
it, it can be core to who you are, and it doesn't have to be you're saving the world, right? It can be something that is just basic and human, um, that can draw people to you for sure. And then the other one, I don't want to pick on it too much, but I do say that authenticity as it relates to advertising is a conflict out of the gates, right? I mean, advertising has a tough time dealing with the word authenticity. They like to use it, but it's really not. You know what I mean? It's a
right,
facade. And where
right,
you're always trying to create a facade, then Patagonia the brand and Patagonia the company are not the same thing if they're creating a facade, right?
right.
You
It's a
need to
tough
let
one.
people see inside. Yeah. Yeah.
Let's invite John into the conversation. John Slater, creative director for ex Meta, ex Twitter, I guess formerly known as Twitter, now X.
Yeah.
And then before that, I worked with John at what we called KodakGallery.com. It was a photo before that. And he also went on and did the brand work for Firefox, which way back when I remember that. But John, tell us about your journey, and you know how do you really try to keep brands authentic?
Yeah, and first, let me just say I had nothing to do with rebranding Twitter as X, just to clarify that. Yeah, my journey really, was not one that was meticulously planned. It was a lot of being at the right place at the right time and then taking advantage of it. So I moved out to the San Francisco Bay Area in the mid 90s after graduating from college and really didn't have any idea what I wanted to do as a grown up. But just so happened that was when the first like .com boom was happening and they were hiring people with liberal arts backgrounds who were kind of like storytellers and creative thinkers and kind of generalists in some way. And that was really what I was all about. So I was able to get my foot in the door as a copywriter at various startups and incredible good fortune of working with Mr. Viali for several years, and then kind of worked my way through and became a creative director at Firefox, and then on to other places that are listed down there in my bio. But the question was about how to help brands be authentic. Was that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's
And
such
also, I
a,
mean, just think about like, there's so much pressure right now for companies to like, okay, we can use, how do we use AI and like, let's change the messaging a little bit by just changing the tone to funny or professional. Like, how do you make it authentic where it's not, it doesn't feel so fake?
yeah, I mean, that's definitely one of those words that everybody uses. And like Aaron was saying, can sometimes backfire on you if you're not being genuine about it. But I think, the first thing you got to know as a brand is who you really are. And I think that that's something that some companies do better than others, obviously, but to really take the time to understand at a really fundamental level, who are you? And kind of, as a simple question, if you were a person, what kind of person would you be? Would you be the funny person? Would you be the thoughtful person? Would you be the practical person? And, like, there's nothing wrong with any of the answers as long as it's really true. And then you just need to figure out how to make the most of being that, just like a kind of a person in real life, like know who you are and then be the best version of that person. You kind of want to be that as a brand and be authentic of that. So if you are the kind of brand that's sort of earnest and about doing good, you probably wouldn't want to, tune your AI to make lighthearted jokes. That would feel off, So I think really starts with knowing yourself at a deep level and making sure you're really rigorous about staying true to that.
Yeah. I think, and this doesn't really touch with some of the brands you've worked with in the past, but I think there's like this, um, I see a lot of brands, and sort of because of the, inflationary atmosphere out there, they're just leading on price. And like, I think it becomes like, that's all they stand for. And it's just like, it loans itself to a low lifetime value for customer, because all they're doing is going back and forth to like who has the lowest price. And even companies have similar items, and it's like,
Yeah.
oh, that's cheaper, I'm going to go there. um and like, how do you move when you're in an organization? How do you, um as a brand marketer, how do you get the attention of the direct response folks, the product people, the merchants and that kind of thing, to really like sort of, because you don't want to be like sort of, being pedantic. You don't, how do you work with them to bring a storytelling? And I imagine it like Meta, they probably didn't think they needed a brand awareness, right? Everybody knows Facebook, but they let everybody else tell their story for them. And
Yeah. I mean, I feel like that's kind of probably a cautionary tale that's, somebody in business school right now is like writing a paper on or something. But definitely, I mean, I've seen this at a lot of places I've worked where you have a product that's really kind of inherently viral, like Firefox, even back in the days when it was cool, or Facebook back in the days when it was cool, or whatever, and it just spreads around on its own, and you kind of fall victim to the thought of like, we don't need to think about branding. That's silly, it's a waste of time or money or whatever. And it kind of becomes, it's this situation like if you have a garden that's growing really well and you don't tend it, it just gets eventually kind of like overgrown and like the weeds kind of, gets kind of tangled or whatever. So I think it's really important to be thoughtful about, again, knowing who you are and making sure you're honoring that, so you don't get in those situations. And yeah, definitely Meta. I mean, the first day I started at Meta was the first day that like the report of, Russian bots in the 2016
right.
election came out. This was in September of 2017. And so literally the entire time I was there was something going on with that. And I think what they realized, a little too late, was that when you don't tell your story, somebody else is going to tell it for you. So, there were some genuine things that people had every right to feel upset about Facebook for, and the branding would not have solved. But at the same time, kind of got to a situation where Facebook and then Meta was taking hits for stuff that was sort of like not really their doing, like there
Yeah.
was actually good stuff going on too that was completely getting overlooked because they just became the poster child for all the bad things that were going
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
online. And definitely they came around to branding in a big way and spent a lot of money and effort on that, trying to
Sort
tell
of
the
on,
story differently,
sort of,
but it might have been too late, you know?
yeah. To me, it just felt like they said, okay, we're not going to deal with this, and we're going to just work on the metaverse, and try to just move them into the new shiny thing. But I mean, I think you sort of had experience with this at Kodak, where everything was price focused. It was like all about the price of getting a print. And it was just you could go to, going back in time here, you could go to Snapfish, you could go to Shutterfly, you could go to Ophoto, and they all have the same price. So how did you like balance, me, the performance marketer, like saying, let's get sales, and then telling our story,
Mhm.
more, like how do you get your foot in the door?
Yeah. I mean, one piece of advice I would give on that front is to really not think about it as like performance marketing over here and brand over here, but to just realize that your brand is everything about you. It's your product, it's your marketing, it's the way people talk about you, when you're not even doing anything. It's just sort of the way abstractly people feel about your product. And if you're able to create a situation where people just sort of, maybe for reasons they can't even articulate, they just kind of like you, that's going to make this people click on your thing versus somebody else's, even when,
You gotta be a likable brand guy.
yeah. I mean, and you're right. You mentioned several examples earlier, like Lyft and Uber. Like, and the reality is most products aren't that unique, like it all comes down to like the way you position it and sell it. But like, there's not that many truly, radically
Right.
different products out there. So if you can create a situation where people just feel good about what you do or feel attached to you in some way. I'm wearing Nike shoes right now. I've been wearing Nike since I was a little kid. I don't know that they're better than other shoes, but that's just what I buy, and that's, I think that's the place you want to get, obviously.
Well, the funny thing about Lyft and Uber, I do think people believe Lyft is a nicer company,
Yeah.
and like I go Uber because I was an early advocate of Uber, but like my wife and daughter will be like, oh no, we much prefer Lyft, and I'm like, it's the same driver, they just changed the logo, you know. Uh, but I think Lyft did something there to make it feel better,
Absolutely. Yeah.
they're a
I mean,
kinder, gentler company.
and they had the advantage of like Uber being kind of like leaning into sort of the asshole brand in some ways, but like, yeah, they had like, remember they had those pink mustaches for a while,
Yeah.
and the whole thing was that they were in the, even like
Yeah.
the lighter color palette and the sort of their ads were much more conversational and kind of like just a totally different tone. I remember you see the billboards and you could just, it felt friendlier. So yeah, that's a great example of really, it's the same driver. The apps basically have all the same features. Probably the prices are pretty much the same, and I will admit I use Lyft too for that same reason. So
I think
it works.
that's a good
Let
example,
me get
though.
to.
If I may, oh, sorry, I was going to jump into like
Go
how
ahead,
they
Aaron.
lost the pink mustache. Like who I
Yeah.
know there was probably a cost associated with that, but think about how
Mhm.
much of an identifier that was, right? You knew those cars, you knew them coming, you
Mhm.
could see them from a distance. It was a big personality piece, and it was probably cost that drove it out, or someone going, "That's just too risky. We're riding around with pink mustaches." I'm like,
It's a little weird. Yeah.
today it's a little weird, right? But that's
Yeah.
what really good brands do, that kind of weird stuff. You're like,
Mhm.
well,
It's
here's
funny.
my
It's
list.
it's funny. We could talk. I noticed on our time, we could probably do a lot better. We could spend a lot more time on these things. Um, but let me bring Marissa into the conversation. Um, Marissa has been in the middle of the brand story, and then the CFO saying we got a hit plan, and it's like, okay, how do we hit those numbers? Um, Tell me a little bit about, Marissa, your journey and like um, how you get into this. It can be a conflict, but how do you compromise to really help, between the CFO saying, hey, we got to get a lower cost of acquisition. You can't go do that brand story. You gotta hit them hard with the promotions. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, as far as my background, which shout out to Mark, he was one of my first marketing bosses coming out of college, which also as a Side note, shout out to also Julie Wainwright, because she actually answered my message via LinkedIn. That's how I really start to get my background. I don't know if you forgot, Mark, about that. I should probably print that out and post that on the wall somewhere. But when I first joined the real world coming out of college, and this was at a time where we were still trying to hit 1 million in terms of the audience that we had, in terms of all the channel penetration that we were doing, growth without retail. It was definitely at a high growth time where, for me, coming out of college, being really new in marketing, that's how it really drove my background about integrated 360 strategy, whether it was outsider performance, doing brand and PR, doing other tactics, even outside, like out of home, print, etc. So outside of the real world, I've been really fortunate to keep my background pretty tight and working on other omni-channel Fortune 500 brands like Williams-Sonoma, like Gap, like Sephora. And then currently now in the role that I'm in, which is definitely more like lower funnel focus, currently at E&J Gallo, which also a different shift in my career, that instead of being really focused on one brand, really looking to scale tactics across a portfolio of brands. So all to say, I've always had roles focused, whether it was integrated or more focused on performance media or more focused on like email, SMS, as well as like loyalty tactics, whether through credit card or more traditional programs. So all to say, I've definitely been in that middle ground where really wanted to show up for both the consumer and the brand and building that right relationship, but then also looking at it from a lower funnel perspective based on how we're building that relationship. How productive is it? Both driving value for the consumer, but also driving value for the brand, which ultimately is that bottom line, whether it reflects through like revenue, ad costs, when you look at it from a retail perspective in terms of margin, etc.
Yeah. And I should say that Marissa has worked on some amazing brands, and they probably were more tilted towards brand than performance. And like Sephora, huge, huge brand awareness. And then Williams Sonoma, I would say they've always had performance in their bones. They were a cataloger back in the day. And so they had that at Pottery Barn.
Yeah.
But E&J Gallo is another, wine's all about branding and marketing. And
Right. Yeah. And I would say probably in regards to this conversation, being at Williams-Sonoma, Pottery Barn was an example that I came at a time that they really were taking a strong point of view and decreasing in doing print and really reinvesting those print dollars into other tactics, such as media. So we did have a pretty big media spend, which a great percentage of it was to search. It was to their advantage to use search, but also have investments in like paid media such as Instagram, Facebook, etc. Because, for instance, they own the product. They own the product in a sense that they really could speak to quality. And because of that, that was an example that even though we had pretty big investments in these key channels, we really had to have a strong relationship internally with both the performance marketers and the brand marketers in regards to the storytelling and what we were really trying to drive, both from like retention and an acquisition standpoint. So just like how the others touched on earlier, like really setting that in like reason why to engage with a consumer. And that's an example where, no, we didn't expect people every 6 months to buy a $5,000 sofa, but like really what was that consumer mindset that they would want to buy a sofa and at that investment versus going to Wayfair or versus going to Target. So that was an example where it really leaned heavy on a retention standpoint. Like, yes, if someone bought a sofa, then what else? Especially given that we were conscientious in regards to discounting, especially depending on certain categories where we were really champion that you wouldn't see otherwise, both in like product innovation, but then also in regards to just flat out quality. So Pottery Barn was an example that even though we did need to grow the audience, there was definitely conversations that had, depending on the channel, what was the right value exchange in terms of messaging. And then the only other thing I would emphasize is, yes, make sure you're showing up authentically as a brand, how you're connecting with the consumer, but really challenging yourself if you're going to be able to maintain that relationship, to really like drive retention and lifetime value. So that's an example where it's hard for a lot of marketers, especially in Q4. And as you're trying to really like in your goals about like prime example, yes, you can throw a discount at someone, but are you really going to see them re-engage with your brand in another 3 months, 6 months, etc.? Unless you do, like, let's say a standard like purchase retargeting trigger where it's like, oh, you show them a 20% off, which that's where it starts to become the good old scenario of a CFO. Like, hey, when I'm looking at cost per acquisition versus cost to actually acquire a consumer, and then from there, like the value they're really driving from a revenue standpoint, was these efforts worth it to throw a discount, let's say during Black Friday?
Yeah, and that's a really good point. I wish your video wasn't pausing, because I want to grab that point for our reel. That's a really good point. And John brought up a little bit of a question that a point about the structure of a company, like where brand and direct response sit. And I don't know if you've dealt with this, Marissa, but like, so with different silos in a company, like you could have the brand team under different management, and the performance team doing their own thing in terms of creative. And long ago, it was just like you all used the same assets. But I see a lot of like, oh, the brand people don't know how to sell. Oh, the direct response people don't know how to engage on social. Do you get into that? Like, do you have these conflicting organizations where you've been in the past? Not this doesn't exist at E&J Gallo, I know. Like, how about some of the previous companies?
No, to be super transparent, every single job that I've had throughout my career, and even to just be candid now, it's the battle that you go through between, again, I've been fortunate to work close with like both merchants and brand marketers, but at the same time being on the side of the fence of performance. So it happens all the time. It's pretty relevant. And I think that's even a prime example about creative. Again, depending on the channel that you're activating, Pottery Barn, again, is a perfect example where they thought catalog creative would suffice for every channel. Like, oh, we can put this like beautiful lifestyle image of someone's like 1,000 square feet living room in Santa Barbara versus on Instagram that didn't really resonate with anybody, or depending on that audience and the demo, that didn't resonate with them in the sense like they're in the market because they have a pet or they're about to have a baby and they want something that might be spill proof and they need to see that social proof versus just seeing some beautiful sofa styled with a bunch of other expensive things. So all to say, I think it's gotten better over the years across the industry, but there's still work to be done. And I do think some of those silos are caused because some departments fall depending on certain like executives, etc. And sometimes they think that you have competing goals when really you're just trying to resonate with the consumer, again, depending on like the objective, the messaging, and the value that you're trying to drive long term. Really like we're not having competing focuses, rather doing performance or creative. We're all just trying to get closer to the consumer.
Yeah, I don't know how you solve that. Maybe it's shared goals, but what I'd love to, just open it up to the group here in terms of like, how do you solve for this? Like, because I talk to a lot of CEOs and they typically want to put brand under them, and then they'll have a marketer do performance. And it creates this disjointed thing, but also it works sometimes as well. Where do you guys see? Should it be one big? Should each department be like have its own creative department? Like, how should it work today?
Yeah, well, I was going to quickly say, I think one thing I've noticed in the last couple of roles that I had is bringing both my creative and brand partner counterparts into the fold in terms of intelligence. So it doesn't feel like you're just churning assets and that's it. So like, as an example, I've noticed some creatives don't realize how impactful the work that they're doing in terms of like, oh, like I didn't realize this Instagram asset was driving like 80% of the overall like web traffic, or oh, because of doing this like on my phone like video, that this actually drove like $30,000 versus doing something in a studio that probably is like 3 to 5 times the amount from an operational standpoint. So that's been the biggest thing for me, and what I also impressed to other people under me that teams that I work on, like really bring like both the highs and the lows, in the sense of also giving like recommendations and feedback based on performance with creative and brand counterparts, and also how to help drive efficiency for them, because at times they might be asked to create too many assets when really from a productivity standpoint only maybe need half of that, or maybe we don't need to do like $4 million plus studio shoots versus really just investing more like an influencer, or like, for instance, non-polished content that resonates
Right.
better.
The non-marketing. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know that siloing it out is really a good idea. I think the more you can keep it all together makes a lot of sense. And I also just wanted to add, since you mentioned CEOs, I think a lot of it really comes from like how seriously the leadership of a company takes this stuff. You know, some CEOs really love it, and it's like you can tell, and that just affects the culture of the organization. And others are sort of like, yeah, somebody else go figure that out and tell me how it's going. And I think that kind of encourages people to devalue it a little bit. So that's I think really it starts at the top.
Yeah, I bet you felt that at some previous places.
Yeah, I mean, I will say I just finished a freelance job at Airbnb, and I was really impressed with just how seriously they took brand and quality of creative and design. And I think it just really, it's part of the culture there that people just really like. There was like, is this photo Airbnb enough, or is this, and lot of little details were really sweated to make sure that things felt a certain way. And they really, to my earlier point, they know who they are. And I think that's probably starts with their CEO and their leadership.
Yeah, and I think Airbnb is a great example of someone's really cut through with like their TV commercials are just like all about, lifestyle, and it's just like it's not about like, get this room for $250 a night. It's about a whole experience. I mean, what's their trademark there, Aaron? Airbnb.
Oh yeah.
What's their big thing?
The Airbnb. Yeah, I'm not gonna be able to think of it.
John, what is it?
I don't like what. I don't think they have a tagline.
Experiences. I think it's experiences.
Oh, experience. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
It's sort of like the joy of travel and connecting with people, and just sort of like that sort of thing. For sure.
Yeah, I think that really cuts through, and I think that brands eventually need to get there. I don't think they can do that. I think they do have to build their customer base up, but they do have to start to get to the brand piece. And we're running out of time, unfortunately, but let me just see. We had a couple more questions for the team, but I just want to make sure we don't have any questions out from the LinkedIn world that we're going to miss. If you do not tell us your story, someone else.
Oh, that's a very good quote / very true.
So true. Not only for the company's brand, but your personal brand as well. So it's very true. You got to always be on the personal note. You always got to be advocating for yourself. But yeah, you have to get a hold of. I mean, there were so many times at the Real where, somebody on the social media would try to like tell us, sort of dictate what our brand was about, and it's like, no. And if we had one bad experience out of like, hundreds of thousands, it doesn't mean it's the rule. And so you really have to bring out the good parts of your brand and tell the story more effectively. And it's a big, I think it's really hard with brands today with social media. I mean, it's just like that. If you don't control it, I mean, I think the social can get out of control. And I think that sort of happened. Jewel had a lot of bad press to begin with, but it just went out of control, on social media and that kind of thing. And so I think I don't know how you deal with that, but it's probably a separate show.
Yeah, I do. Well, I have a comment on that I think you'll find interesting. I think what social has done to us collectively is it's created that transparency. It's actually created authenticity in a real way, right? You cannot make false promises and put stuff out there that's such a massively fabricated lie, because social will call you out on it. right?
Yeah, for sure.
The Audi ad during the Super Bowl of 2019, that they basically were trying to advocate for women's pay, and their entire board is predominantly male. And you're like, well, okay, guys,
Oh, yeah.
right? And it like
No, that's
literally
true.
their ad bought a big PR problem, is what they bought, and that's it's created a requirement of transparency, or you can't participate. Right? You
Yeah, I
can't be
think
in that game if you're not really transparent about stuff. Otherwise,
I think you're right.
you get and it spreads so easily. The distribution of information so easily and so quickly that it gets ahead of brands. There's no way they can keep up at a corporate environment where there's structure, where there's approvals and everything else. I became very when Prince died. There's a social person there at 3M who put out a version of the 3M logo with a teardrop between the 3 and the M, and then made it purple, and they put it up on their socials. Now that I know the 3M corporate entity department, there's no way they got that approved unless they started the design 6 months ago and predicted his death.
Right.
It just was not feasible. So they had to have skipped some steps in there, and they did. And the person who done it just skipped that entire department, didn't get approval. It's an interesting
Yeah.
thing what social has done to brands. It made them, they have to be, and what most of what you see being called out is because they haven't been, right? They haven't been
Right.
transparent about who they have and or what's really going on inside that organization.
I think it really tests how authentic a brand is. And because it used to be just the brands talking out with, on the broadcast media, and there was no dialogue. Now there's a dialogue. And so brands have to think about that in the modern age.
Yeah, a
We didn't get
distributed
to
dialogue.
we didn't get to AI, but I think that's a trend that the social. How do brands react to social in today's world? And I think it is a truth. It's sort of forces a brand to really look at its values and say, "Are we being honest here?" But it looks like we have no comments coming in from the LinkedIn universe. But I wish we could talk for more time. Lots of great conversations here that I could keep going. But thank you for our panel for coming today, taking time out of your day to talk about brand marketing in the modern age. And hopefully we'll have some of you guys back for more conversation. And thank you, everyone.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.